We have Rachel Archambault here, and Rachel's actually been on the podcast before, but we were just talking about this before we hopped on that we're getting a little bit more niche. We're taking the topic of being trauma informed and applying it to what that looks like in a therapy setting when we are dealing with quote unquote behaviors and quote unquote non-compliance and like what that really could be rooted in. So Rachel, thank you so much for coming back again.
Thank you for having me again. I loved speaking with you, and this is my favorite topic, trauma-informed care, but specifically what we're talking about today.
Amazing. Well, it's so needed. So I can't wait to dive in. But before we go there, let's go ahead and give some background information. If you'd like to go first, and then I'll go quickly after you.
Sure. So my name is Rachel. I'm a speech language program specialist in Broward County Public Schools in South Florida. I am supporting all of the high schools and non-traditional schools, and Broward County is the sixth largest district in the country. So I'm supporting 44 schools and all of the speech pathologists at those schools. I've been in this role. I think this is my fourth school year in this role, and I'm super excited. I love this job supporting other adults and figuring out how to be the best speech pathologist they can. And I got into this role. I was at a high school. I consider myself a secondary level SLP. That's my favorite thing to talk about other than trauma informed care. But I experienced a traumatic event while at work in 2018. And that's what brought me to trauma informed care in the first place. I needed to figure out a way how to work with the community, myself, and students who had undergone trauma. And that's where I found trauma informed care. And I've been educating SLPs, healthcare providers, educators on trauma informed care ever since. And it's not just applicable in the school setting. I've worked in all of the speech settings. You can use trauma informed care when you're working with anyone. So that is what my role is, to communicate with other people of how trauma informed care can be used in your specific setting.
Amazing. And I bet you find that super meaningful across the board.
Very. I have found a passion in this, and I enjoy talking about trauma informed care and educating others. And it's been a really helpful thing for me in my healing journey, but also just to educate others on this topic.
Yeah, I have to say, Rachel, I think the last time we spoke was about 4 years ago.
No
And
way. No way.
it was. Yeah, it was during 2020, I believe. I could be wrong. I think it was during like that year, but I feel like I noticed a change in you in general, overall. I don't know. It seems
Thank you.
like, yeah, it seems like you're in a really good place. I don't know if I'm just making overgeneralization,
No,
but I
I
don't know if this has contributed to that or not.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that I've become very comfortable and somewhat of an expert in this area of trauma informed care, and I am able to see it at a different level. And I feel this is really this part of my job. This is the presentations I do. That is my passion. I would love to do this full time at one point. So I'm really comfortable doing these interviews and educating others. Like that's what I hopefully will be doing full time at some point. But I that feels good to me that you see that.
Yeah, no, and it could be that like you've just gotten so comfortable with presenting in general, and this is such a passion for you that if you could do this every day of your life, you
Hmm.
would be the happiest person. So I'm
Oh, for sure.
happy for you.
Thank you.
And I am excited to keep following along on your journey, but we're so grateful to have you. And I'll quickly share my background since I do this in all the presentations. But my name is Vinny Litvak, and I go by she, her. I host the Species Side Out podcast, and I have a passion for AAC and literacy. I've been able to present at national and local conferences. I co-authored a book series, and I have a almost 4-year-old toddler who is really into imaginative play right now. And it's just been really fun to see her develop. And I feel like she was the impetus for this topic that the presentation is on because I've seen, not to knock behavior therapy, but I've seen behavioral strategies interwoven into so much childhood activities and like extracurricular things, like whether it's in swimming or sleep training. Like I've just seen it implemented across the board, and I think it's really helped me to kind of realize like, wow, how many professionals are not actually looking at like what's really going on and focusing on the fact that these are little humans. They are not little adults. And we need to build that connection first and just support them and help them regulate versus getting them to comply with our adult based demands, you know? So that is a little bit about me. And since this is available for ASHAs to use, we're going to share our financial disclosures as well. I can go first. I have ownership interest in Speechy Side Up and Tassel. I'm also an affiliate for Simple Practice and Meaningful Speech, and I'm a member of ASHA. How about you, Rachel?
So I'm a full-time employee of Broward County Public Schools, and I recently, in the last 2 years, have become the official owner of PTSD SLP LLC. That's where I do my presentations, speak around the country at ASHA, at all the state associations, and whoever will have me. And my non-financial disclosures, I'm an ASHA member. I'm a member of the SIG 20 group, which is the Counseling Special Interest Group. I'm a FLASHA member and an advisory board member of CHAT, which is a speech pathology nonprofit out of Chicago.
Great. Okay, so here's our agenda. We're already going through our introductions and backgrounds. Then we're going to get into an introduction to trauma-informed care. Then you're going to talk about defining trauma and its impact. Then we'll get into what connection over compliance in trauma-informed care looks like. And then we'll talk about practical trauma-informed care strategies and wrap up with some references and closing remarks. So by the end of this presentation, we hope that you'll be able to describe at least 2 key principles of trauma-informed care and how they guide practices in different environments, define at least 2 types of trauma and their potential impacts on individuals' emotional and behavioral responses, list at least 2 ways connection over compliance enhances trauma-informed care in therapeutic or educational settings, and then identify at least 2 practical strategies for implementing trauma-informed care that foster safety and connection. All right, so let's dive in. Let's talk about what trauma-informed care actually is.
Okay, so trauma-informed care, depending on where you look, is going to have anywhere from 3 to 4 R's of trauma-informed care. So those 3 R's would be realizing, responding, and resisting. So number 1, realizing the prevalence of trauma. So many people who I've spoken to around the country think that trauma exists far less than what the statistics actually show. One of the statistics is that students up until the age of 16, 60%, at least 60%, have experienced at least one traumatic event, one potentially traumatic event. So if you're working in a high school, the probability is most students in front of you have most likely experienced a traumatic event, rather than thinking the opposite, that none of these students have experienced a traumatic event, and I only need to tiptoe around the ones who I know who have experienced a traumatic event. So the presence of trauma, it's a national health crisis. It's a health crisis. We need to know that trauma exists far more than we think it is. Responding to trauma. So what do we do about it? How do we support those who have gone through trauma? The other thing I want you to know about trauma-informed care is a lot of people think, well, Rachel, I know what you've been through, and trauma-informed care was useful for that population, yourself, your students. But really, trauma-informed care is preventative. My school should have received trauma-specific services after the fact, after going through a traumatic event. Trauma-informed care, I like to think of as before. It's preventative. So it's making sure that we have the right supports in place so that someone goes through a traumatic event and they are better able to heal and to cope with that. That's what trauma-informed care is. So it's responding to that trauma. And then the last R is resisting retraumatization. And I'm talking to related health providers, other educators, and healthcare providers. Our job is to make sure that we are not causing additional trauma or re-traumatizing in any way. So we need to resist that and prevent it from happening. So there's some changes that we can make to lessen the probability or that risk that we might cause harm. That is our role.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know a lot of things that you shared in our previous talk, which I'm sure you'll talk about today too, were like so fascinating to me. One of those being the prevalence, like 60% is significant. Do you happen to know prevalence at like different age groups, let's say like elementary, middle, high? Like, does it matter? Does it increase at one level or another, or?
That statistic specifically, it's just saying kids from 0 to 16 that age has 60% have experienced a potentially traumatic experience. So it's not breaking it down by age, but what we have found, there's other studies out there like the ACEs study, and that has been redone over the years from the 1990s when it was first conducted. What we are seeing with just traumatic events in general is children from 0 to 5, the more traumatic experiences and the more adverse child experiences, the more traumatizing experience a child has, the worse physical and mental health outcomes. That is like the biggest statistic to know, that a lot of people think of trauma as just like a one-time thing. It doesn't affect them too bad. Kids are resilient. We hear that all the time. But what the research actually shows is the more traumatic experiences a child has, the worse physical and mental health outcomes. So that might be early death. We see that a 20-year subtraction of life expectancy. We see heart disease, diabetes, all of these actual physical health concerns can be correlated directly to how many childhood traumatic experiences someone has.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like that is very significant. And are you going to talk about what trauma could look like in that 0 to 5 population or the 0 to 16 population? And I know it has to do with that person's like perception and experience as well. So it's not like one trauma is bigger than the other, and you'll get into that. But I don't want
Yes,
to like glaze over it if it's not like in a slide.
definitely. I think the next slide we have like what is trauma, and in my presentations the biggest question that I get is, well, Rachel, how do I know what is trauma and what's not? What can I consider to be a traumatic event? What should I feel counts? Actually, one of my favorite quotes is, we should not, as humans, decide what counts as trauma for another. And that includes our students and other adults, because trauma-informed care is not only for children, it's for all the ages that we work with. And on this slide, we're saying trauma is an individual's perspective. There's people who went through the trauma that I went through at my school that say, no, it wasn't traumatic to me because of the supports I had, because I was on the other side of the campus. I didn't experience the same things as someone else. And then you have a bunch of people who have been diagnosed with PTSD. So many people can experience one event and feel differently about it, and that is completely valid. But one of the definitions that we go off of is trauma overwhelms the ordinary systems of care that give people a sense of control, connection, and meaning. And many definitions, if you look up the word trauma, it'll say overwhelms in almost all of them, because it's not our rational decision to decide, oh, you know what, that wasn't traumatic for me. It's our body and brain that say, nope, it was a traumatic event for you. One thing that I present about is the learning brain versus survival brain. So I think a lot of us think that we are getting a child walking into our room who's going to be automatically in the learning brain. And we have to acknowledge that the survival brain overtakes the learning brain. If survival brain is on, learning cannot happen. So it's our job to help create that connection and control, to help them feel safe. And we'll go over the pillars of trauma-informed care, but it's our job to support our client, to bring them back to feel safe so that they can learn, to get them out of that survival brain into the learning brain so that we can meet our goals. But someone might not feel safe with us. Someone might not feel safe in the room without their support person, whoever it is. So trauma is an individual's perspective, and it's not for us to decide this counts and this doesn't. We just have to support our clients to help them get into the learning brain versus survival brain.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Can you get a sense of so like for a child who can't say, oh, this is traumatic for me, what cues are you looking for in a child, let's say 0 to 5, that something is traumatic to them? Like what type of responses maybe they might be presenting that can show?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking for like distress signals in any way. And I'm trying to see on my computer right now, there is a graphic that is stress response in children. So I think that it would be helpful for you to look at fight, flight, or freeze, the behaviors that they're showing. And even adult might not be able to say, this was traumatic for me. And they may not believe it was traumatic for them, but it's their brain and their body. So let's think of fight, flight, and freeze response. So in children, we might have the flight response. They might want to escape. They might run away, unfocused, hard to pay attention. They might fidget, restless. They're hyperactive. But because we're professionals, we might see a kid who's hyperactive and go, oh, that's an ADHD kid, or we might credit it to something else. So we just need to be looking at the behaviors and say, how can we support them to bring them back to that learning brain, right? How can we make them feel safe? How can we give them a choice here to make them feel better about the situation? The fight response, they might be yelling, screaming, using mean words, hitting, kicking, biting, throwing, punching, blaming, demanding or controlling. They might be labeled oppositional, defiant, non-compliant. That's a big one with what we're talking about today, right? And as an adult who's been diagnosed with PTSD and ADHD, if my brain is in survival mode and I'm panicked about something, if an adult or a child were to tell me, all right, we need to move in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 and start a countdown, my brain is going to override anything that I'm hearing from you and say, nope, it's not safe to do so. So we need to consider it that it may not be a behavior or choice. It might be the survival brain that's saying something is wrong and we need to figure it out before we can move, before we can follow directions. And actually in the fight response, you can't register consequences. So it doesn't matter if you take away their recess, you take away whatever it is that's a prized possession of theirs, they weren't in the right mind to register a consequence that's coming. Or we might want to consider their brain is not allowing them to rationalize that, oh no, I really don't want to miss recess. So we're just punishing them for something that they don't have control over. So it's really important to take that into account, that they may feel unsafe. And we might be an adult saying, well, there's nothing for them to feel unsafe about, right? I'm a safe person, they're a safe person, whoever, but it's their perspective of what's happening. And it's our job to help them feel as safe as possible.
Yes. Oh, so good. Thank you so much for sharing those examples. I feel like that really illustrates and also like makes you feel kind of bad for kids that are going through that and don't have providers or teachers that understand this, right? And
Yeah.
using those type of consequences. So it's so important that this information is available to educators. So let's talk about the like what connection over compliance and how what it has to do with trauma informed care.
So just to start off, in trauma-informed care, there are typically 6 pillars of trauma-informed care. So that would be safety, choice, collaboration and mutuality, trust and transparency, empowerment, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. And I wanted to put on this slide because we are talking about connection over compliance. Especially in the school system, we're so heavily taking data. We have to take data for everything we do. I get a lot of new SLPs that come in that I support, and they immediately day one are, doing the pluses and minuses. They're taking data immediately. And I just sit in the room and I can look at these students and they're like, who is this lady? Like, I don't even know you. Like, what are we doing here? So connection over compliance means to me, we need to build that relationship first. We need to look at all the pillars of trauma-informed care, which will help us build a connection. That's the whole point here, is not only building this connection, but we are trying to prevent and resist re-traumatization or traumatization or harm. So by looking at all of the pillars of trauma-informed care, specifically these 4 areas, I ask myself in sessions or when I'm collecting data, am I prioritizing this client's safety? Am I giving them choice and collaboration? Am I collaborating with them? It doesn't matter if it's a 3-year-old, we can still collaborate with a 3-year-old. Am I prioritizing trust and transparency? I can't tell you how many speech rooms I go into and a 5-year-old will say like, oh, how many of these do I have to do? More like trials, right? And the SLP says, don't worry about it, we have a few more. And it ends up being 15 more minutes. That's not a few more. So what it's doing is actually decreasing their trust in you. They're saying, she lied to me. This is way more than 3 minutes. This is way more than a minute or just a few seconds. This is taking forever. And I don't have trust in this person. And then empowerment and voice. We want to help our clients advocate for themselves and give them the power to have voice. So by considering all of these specific pillars and all of the pillars in general, we are trying to build connection before we are working on compliance and data collection. By doing that, we are reducing the harm that we are causing, the possible harm, and creating that connection so that they feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think if you just jump straight into, let's say, data collection and you don't take the time to build that connection, then you might miss the trauma cues too, right?
Yeah.
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 Interesting. Well, I feel like so these are the pillars, right?
Yes,
Okay.
these are some. Depending on what website you look at, and there's SAMHSA is probably the guru of trauma informed care. That's the Substance Abuse Mental Health Association. They came out with a paper in 2014 of how to be trauma informed, and they listed 6 pillars of trauma informed care: safety, choice, collaboration and mutuality, trust and transparency, empowerment, and cultural, historical, and gender issues. So in a session with a client, I always ask myself, did I provide safety to this student? How can I make them feel safer? I always ask myself these questions. Did I provide choice here? And if there's ever an aspect of, no, I should have provided more choices here, that's where I can improve upon, and that will help build the relationship and the connection versus compliance of just think of compliance as just sitting down with someone you don't know day one and you're just starting these trials. You're not giving them, a buy-in to who you are. They don't trust you. So I've seen in some cases an SLP just goes in and gets right to the data, and you see the client looking around like, I don't know you. Like, what are we doing here? What's the point?
Right.
We need to make sure that we are checking in with them so that they know what they are doing and we can build that connection. That's the first step.
Thank you for explaining that. And then you said another pillar was, like working with marginalized communities and understanding like how trauma can impact those communities as well. Can we talk a little bit about that too?
Absolutely. So, one of the pillars is cultural, historical, and gender issues. So, we need to ensure our cultural, historical, and gender humility so that we can recognize and eliminate any potential cultural, racial, gender, or other bias. So one thing that I was actually talking about today is I was at a school today that it's a high school, a very poor community. And it is, we have police officers at every school. And what I was talking with the SLPs about today is they noticed that a lot of students get arrested very quickly at the school. And these are Black and brown students. They get arrested very quickly rather than many of my schools that is majority white kids. There's a lot of steps between that and getting arrested. It's very rare that they get arrested. So we have to look into the cultural, historical, and gender issues of what is going on in our setting to understand why is this population getting punished at a seemingly much higher level? Why is this student with a disability not complying? Why are they not? Because they're not understanding. Do they have the language disorder? We have to understand what is going on in the background and making sure that we are trained and understanding that we might be biased or not seeing what the bias is. And that's why it's important to make sure that you are getting training on cultural, historical, and gender issues within your setting and through ASHA or wherever you get your training. It's super important so that we don't cause harm in that way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine how that immediately like tears down trust when something like that happens.
Yeah. I've spoken to a couple SLPs. We after something happens in the news, especially in the high school, the kids want to talk about it. And I've seen in some cases that the SLPs will just sit there and listen to a student's concerns, and they say, I don't really understand what's happening in the world, or this really scares me. And for us to be, we can take off our SLP hats for a second and just be an empathetic listener and say, yeah, that does sound really scary. Instead of saying, that's not real, that's not happening, don't worry about that, it's not, we want to provide trust and transparency. We want to show safety. And it doesn't have to be physical safety, but you're showing that client that you are safe to talk to about your concerns, about whatever you have questions about. So it's making sure that we're taking into account our clients' needs. And if you are just going into compliance and we have to do these trials for the R sound right now, we're not focusing on the connection. We're missing that. And your best therapy will be done when you get connection with a client. If we're breezing past that, It's going to be about compliance, and you might get 100 trials of something and be like, oh, I've got the best data, but you're not having the best relationship. And that's the goal.
Oh, you need to say that again, or
Oh gosh, you got to
said
replay that.
you might get the best data, but you're not going to have the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So poignant. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
mentioning that. And I think what I would have liked to do on this slide, I didn't think about it till now, is to show what the opposite of these would be, right? So how do you know if your session is focusing more on connection or focusing more on compliance? Maybe we can do like the opposite of safety, the opposite of choice and collaboration. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it comes down to I think it comes down to a reflection. It's
Mhm.
always asking yourself, did I provide safety, or where didn't I provide safety? Did I shut down safety? Did I provide choice? Where did I shut down choice, or where did I prevent giving a choice? Where could I add a choice next time? Where did I break trust? Where could I foster trust? Where did I shut down their voice? Where could I add to their voice? Like, I always want you to be saying like 100% given, 100% not given. Find somewhere in the middle that was not, and work your way the next session to try to foster that. Also, it's super important to apologize. I say this a lot, but I never heard an apology from an adult until I was an adult. And it's very important to say like, hey, you know what? I ignored you last time about this specific thing, or, I breezed by that, or, I was in a bad mood that day. I'm sorry. Like, do you want to talk about anything? Doing that with high schoolers, I will tell you, they feel so validated of like, oh, I didn't know an adult can apologize to you. And even if you're working with a 5-year-old, it's very important to apologize to them. And that is something that builds trust, builds transparency. One thing that I mentioned within transparency, not just with our data collection, transparency with our emotions as the provider. So if I walk into school and I'm having a bad day, I know people say that, you have to leave it at the door, but that's not the case for some people. Like, I think I'm keeping it cool, but my face says otherwise, or my body language says otherwise. And if a student were to say to me, hey, Miss A, are you okay? If I say, yep, don't worry about it, and I just move on, I'm then somewhat gaslighting them into not understanding people's emotions, saying, oh, I guess I was totally off in that moment. I'm not, I don't need to go into, well, my boyfriend broke up with me that day and I was super like, I don't need to go that hard, but I can say, you know what, I am having a bad day, but I'll be okay. Thank you for asking. And that's validating that they were on the right track. And especially with many of our students who have pragmatic concerns, that's a win for them, that they identified the appropriate emotion. We don't need to go in depth about what we're dealing with, but we can say, you picked the right emotion. Thank you for noticing. I'm totally okay, but thank you for asking. That's so validating to them and building that relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, what a great example. And like also explaining, what we've been told we should do, but why it's more important to actually be transparent. So thank you
Yeah,
for illustrating that.
of course.
So what can we do to be trauma informed?
So, number one, before all else, is understanding our own dysregulation or our own regulation. Number two, understanding the prevalence and impact of trauma. So, we talked a little bit about how often trauma exists. That's very important. Altering our language, and then prioritizing relationship building over data collection. Understanding our own dysregulation, that would be the most important one, because you cannot be a dysregulated adult regulating someone else's emotions. You have to be regulated yourself. So, a reflection I always ask people to do within a session or after a session or after a whole day is, do you know your triggers of dysregulation? Do you know your stressors? So, sub out that word triggers for stressors. What stresses you out? For me, it's loud noises. So I know if I'm in my speech room and a lawnmower is going by for 6 hours that day and it's and I'm trying to do something, I know that I'm not going to be in a good mood for that. Do you know what you look like when you're triggered? Do you know what you look like when you're stressed? I know my body gets very tense, my face gets very angry. Am I able to identify when I'm stressed? Can I do it in the moment and go, oh, I'm kind of not being nice right now, it's because of this noise? Or can you do it after the fact? Can you say, I think I was stressed earlier because of that? and I'm going to have to apologize for that. How do you regulate yourself when triggered? Do you have any coping strategies? For me, I really like the 4-7-8 breathing activity. So that's breathing in for 4, holding for 7, and breathing out for 8. So for me, that is a coping strategy, as well as fidget things. I have fidgets everywhere around because that is something that helps me regulate myself. Is my dysregulation negatively impacting a client? Is my emotional regulation negatively impacting a session? And then finally, am I causing harm? And none of us go into this profession to cause harm. Like that, we go in because we want to help people, but it is better for you to acknowledge that you possibly have caused harm in some way, so that you can do better and not do that next time, rather than saying I've never caused harm and I never will, because you could have, in very, very small increments, you could have. And we can do our best to make sure that that doesn't do that in the future. But understanding our own dysregulation is the number one thing that we should do, because if we have a student who's dysregulated, we can't be screaming at them to be calm. That's not how that works. We need to be calm and model how they can be calm. That's called co-regulation. So if we are not able to do that and we're telling someone to calm down, that is going to escalate the situation. And we need to be in this calm brain for learning to happen. And that is the number one priority.
So, what does an educator, teacher, parent, SLP do when they are dysregulated, but they have to still, quote unquote, like perform or teach or work with the child?
Totally. So the number one step is acknowledging what your triggers are. So you might be in a room and you might be an adult who hasn't ever considered this. You might not know what your stressors are. It's important for you to identify them first so that you can say, oh, I think I am a little bit dysregulated by loud noises. I know for me, because I know that this is a stressor that is going to come up all day, every day, possibly. I know when I go into airports, I always have 3 pairs of earplugs on me at all time, because if I lose one, if I've got another, I have multiple backups, because noises are such a distressing thing for me. So when I go to an airport, I've got my earplugs, I've got these noise canceling headphones, because the reality is I might be sat next to a screaming child. And what is the benefit to me sitting there on a 6-hour flight upset or not able to do anything about it? I am preventatively making myself some coping strategies to make sure that I'm okay for if that happens. But what I see happening to many adults is they have no coping strategies. They are bothered by a noise and it stresses them out for the entire day. That entire day, they are interacting with students, interacting with coworkers. They are short with them. They are creating actually more dysregulation because they are dysregulated. So understanding what stresses us out is the number one step. Having coping strategies, you can do breathing activities, you can investigate different coping strategies. But to your original question, what should instructors do? For me, if I were in a situation, or I've worked at a private practice where there were noises that were disturbing me so much, I can knock on the door of the OT next door and say, hey, just give me 30 seconds. I need to run to the bathroom. What would you do in that moment if you had to run to the bathroom? You're not abandoning your classroom. You're not leaving a bunch of kids to their own devices, but you can say, hey, I need another person, another adult to come in here and relieve me for 2 seconds. I will be right back. Whether that's washing your hands. So that's one strategy. Ice cubes, a lot of people use to help calm themselves. Maybe it's just you going on a walk for 30 seconds. It is safer for you to take that time out and regulate yourself with some coping strategies, rather than you sitting in that stress all day and causing harm to people with your wrath of dysregulation.
Such great points. And I think so important for people to hear and to be validated. You mentioned that one of your triggers is loud noises. I have quite a few triggers as well. Actually, I think after our last conversation, I went and wrote them all down and what like coping strategies could be helpful for them. Do you find that the triggers ever go away, or is that something that kind of sticks with you for life?
No, I think they go away. So specifically after my experience, my traumatic experience, there were certain triggers within that school that were very distressing to me. One of them being the sound of helicopters or emergency vehicles. That was something that was traumatizing or could be re-traumatizing if I'm driving down the street and I hear these sounds, or I'm in my apartment and there's a bunch of ambulances going by me. It's been 6.5 years. They've absolutely lessened because my body is more in control. But again, these are also noises. So overall noises, I think I'm also just like a sensory person in that way, that I'm an introvert. I need quiet. So those things have definitely lessened. My heart rate doesn't go up anymore. I'm not in fight or flight when that happens, but I also have coping strategies to get myself through those moments. So I know, oop, I hear the sound. That is something that has been distressing for me. Let me do some breathing activities so that I won't even get to the point of being distressed by them because I've identified it immediately. So that's where I hope people get to that point, that it's identified and they can say, oh, the lawn guy is coming today. That's going to bother me. Let me make sure I have my noise canceling headphones on. Even if you are in a room with self-contained students that are screaming the whole day, it is better for you to have earplugs in to dampen the noise, not to get out the noise, but that will help you to be in a more regulated position to best educate them. That is completely doable and is a coping strategy.
I feel like that's reassuring because I think someone might say, okay, that type of setting isn't for me because I have this trigger. But it makes sense that if you are in those type of situations, but you have coping strategies and you feel safe, that you're able to develop some resilience in those more positive experiences subsequently. Yeah, I'm thinking, are you part of the alternative SLP jobs Facebook group?
I'm not in that one, but I see posts every now and then about it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I know our field in general can be very overwhelming, but how many people are also being triggered, like in the settings that they're in and have no idea how
I
to cope with this?
I agree because I don't think so. When I was in undergrad, grad school, high school, I tried to go into a school and observe anyone. I was like, I don't know what this field is. I've just heard of it. But I got such pushback of, oh no, well, that's against FERPA, that's against HIPAA. It's you can't come in. So I never actually got to see what this looks like. And if I mean, how am I supposed to know as a high schooler? I don't have those. I never reflected on what things stressed me out at that point. So maybe I would have chosen a different career, but it's also saying, how could I stay in this career? I would feel awful to know that someone, an SLP, chose a different career because they work in a very high needs setting and can't handle the noise. I would say, are you wearing earplugs? Are you allowed any accommodations? Are you able to take breaks? Like what is being done here to help support you? So actually, their employers above them, how are they being trauma informed? I would ask the same questions that I asked you all earlier. How can I make this employee feel safe? How can
Mm.
I give them choice? How can I be how can I foster trust and transparency? I would ask exactly the same questions because we can only be as trauma informed as the systems above us. So our employers need to be trauma informed to us so that we can be trauma informed to our clients.
Rachel, I feel like you have such a bigger impact on adults than what you're currently doing, whether it's teaching at a university level or at a job training level, whether it's through ASHA. I don't know. I just feel like you can make an even bigger impact, and it's just so vital to our
Thank you.
field.
Thank
Yeah.
you. The presentation that I felt best about this year was I did trauma informed care supervision.
Oh,
So this was for SLPs who are supervising CFs or interns or undergrads or whoever it is, because I hear from all these SLPs who had terrible supervisors and they prevented them at some point from being in this field. I had my own experiences with it, but I think I see it as such different, partly from working in toxic workplaces, that I'm like, oh, if anyone was trauma informed, this would have been prevented and I possibly still could have been there. you know? So I'm always thinking in a trauma-informed mindset, which is exhausting sometimes, but it's also where I would like to live. I would like to live in a trauma-informed mindset, evaluating what things can be done to reduce harm to whoever it is, whether it's the employee, the client, the family too. We need to take that into account.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. You gave some good tangible examples, I think, of, you said like wearing headphones. Do you have other coping strategies and the breathing exercise? Any other strategies that you recommend?
So it's definitely based on the person. And I know that some people really don't like breathing activities. They think they're silly. There's a bunch of apps out there, like the Calm app. We have Headspace. There's a lot of apps that help you with meditation, or not even meditation, but it's really just about bringing yourself back to a state of calm.
Mhm.
There's a lot of stuff to do with senses. So for me, I know that if I'm stressed, I'm typically very warm. So I walk around with a lunchbox. And if I'm going to all these schools, if I'm getting stressed out about anything, I will go into my lunchbox and get out like the ice cube, right? That's keeping my lunchbox cold. Because ice for me is something that like jolts my system, and whether I put it on my chest, behind my neck, in my hands, or just washing your hands. A lot of people who don't have access to ice will just wash their hands. Temperature is a big thing. Smells. I know a lot of people after the trauma at our school would carry around like a bottle of essential oils just to like sniff, because it's a shock to the system. And you can look online, there's a bunch of different regulation strategies. And it might be helpful for you just to go through those and say, maybe I could do that one. Let me see how I like that. Because I know for us, after trauma, trying to evaluate what your coping strategies are is almost impossible. You are always dysregulated in a case like that. You have to figure it out when you're regulated to use when you're dysregulated. I hope that made sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, figure out your coping strategies when you're calm and regulated versus figuring it out when you're in distress.
In case somebody like has never heard one of your presentations or heard our previous conversation, I think we talked about what not to do when we suspect trauma. Can we touch on that too?
Yeah. So it's a difficult question. So what not to do?
Like not calling it out like, "Oh, I see that you have experienced trauma." I remember like we talked about that last time.
Yeah. So number one, we are not trauma detectives. So if you are an SLP who feels like, this client is acting a bit strange, maybe you suspect trauma. Our job is not to sit the student down or the parent down, or call whoever it is and say like, what trauma has your child experienced lately? They're acting a little different. Like, that's not our role. Our role as speech pathologists is to refer to the appropriate person and like take data. So for me, if I have a student who I've had this whole year and then suddenly their behavior changes, I wouldn't say, oh, that's because they've experienced trauma. Like, that's not where we jump to. Our role is to refer to the appropriate source. So whether that's at the school system, the school social worker, the family counselor, the guidance counselor, the school psychologist, you have your own process in your building, and you don't go, well, I think they've had trauma. Our role is to say, they've been acting differently. Here are the symptoms I'm seeing that is different from their personality. And you should know that because you've created a relationship with them. You've created a connection with them, and you should be able to spot a difference there. That is our role as speech pathologists. We're not investigating. We're not trying to figure out what trauma they've experienced, because we could cause more harm in that. The opposite side of that, when you do know a specific trauma they've experienced, a lot of people do better with avoiding those certain topics. So one of the things that I educate on in my presentations is violent language, right? So as a trauma-informed provider, I don't know who is sitting in front of me. I don't know who in my presentation has experienced a violent act of anything. But because I'm trauma informed, I would rather remove violent language from my speech at all, my daily everyday speech, because I don't know who's sitting in front of me, rather than saying, oh, well, Rachel's gone through a traumatic event that was violent, so I'm just going to remove these words for her. So a violent language phrase, I mean, even bullet points, shoot me a text, shoot me an email. I hear that all day. And I'm not saying that that phrase is traumatizing to me. That's not at all what it is. But what it is it takes me out of my learning brain. It distracts me from, I'm like, that was a different phrase. What ended up happening after what happened at the school, no one educated us on violent language, but it just disappeared from everyone's speech because it was thought of like, it felt creepy. And what I realized, it just wasn't trauma informed because it would distract us from being able to do academics, teaching, whatever it is. That is something that we can do by changing our language for everyone versus just tiptoeing around for certain people. If I knew that this kid went through this specific event, I would try probably even harder. But we can do that for everyone to make sure that we're not saying those things that we don't know what has gone on in their lives. We can't know everyone's triggers.
Yeah, such great points. Can we talk a little bit about the influence of social media and screens, maybe like video games, on the clients that we work with and how that can impact maybe trauma and anxiety?
It's interesting because in my district right now, this year, we have banned cell phones for all students. And the way that the ban works is it's from the start of the day to the end of the day, not even lunch. Teachers are not supposed to have it, like not allowed to give them permission during their classes, but because teachers have different opinions about it, it is like, oh, in this class I can have my phone and whatever. I think that this ban was done with a good intention to try to make kids concentrate because we see them so distracted by the phones. But also from a trauma-informed perspective, I would never put a total ban like that because for me, a cell phone is such a safety component.
Mhm.
Many of these students and their parents are very fearful of the violence that happens in a school, not just with what I experience, but just every day, whether it's a drill that happens, they need total communication or to see that their child is where they're supposed to be. Their tracking devices, it's a safety component. And when we are removing that, we are reducing the trauma-informed care that we are providing. So that has been an interesting take. But we do see a lot of students who are highly addicted to their phones. They have no controls on their screen time. The parents don't know what they're seeing. I mean, I've heard from a couple of my parent friends that their child was on kid YouTube and they end up on some like nefarious website, and that is very scary for the parents. It's scary for the students, and they've been exposed to a lot of things. I mean, you and I growing up, we had cell phones too. And I remember seeing some very scary things online, just like searching or being shown by someone. And I think that can contribute to like a desensitization of a lot that we're seeing. The anxiety that we're seeing in high school students and younger is the highest it's ever been. And I also think that's partly because the stigma of mental health concerns has been significantly reduced. A lot of kids talk about it. They say, I'm in therapy, and they're not ashamed of that. So I think there's some good that's being done. But in the schools, especially, we should be looking for schools attempting to be as trauma informed as possible. That way we can reduce the harm that's being done in the school system to our students.
Mhm. So, what are your recommendations for educators, speech therapists here? Besides, like having you come out and speak to their school, how can they educate their teams as well?
I think they always need to ask themselves about the pillars. How can we provide an aspect of safety to these families, to the students, to the community? Is any of our rules not giving these pillars? Are we, by this policy that we have at the school, is it preventing safety? Is it preventing choice, trust, and transparency? How is it hurting our population? We should always be reflecting on that. So if they just go through their policies and procedures at the school, you can find rules that are unnecessary and actually causing harm. And I'm sure the intention is to make people safe by putting these policies into the rules at the school, but in some cases it actually could be causing more harm and re-traumatization and trauma.
Would you mind giving any like tangible examples?
I think, I mean, a cell phone ban is one of them, that the intention is very, very good. But at the end of the day, you're going to have parents who are saying, I need to have access to my child and text them, and they need to respond at any point, because I am in fear of what happens at the school. There's probably like smaller things than that at each of the school levels. How about eating in classrooms, right? I have never been someone who says, no, you can't eat in here. I actually welcome it. Like, yes, please, what food do you have? Please eat here. And yes, we are taking into account allergies. If anyone has a peanut allergy, I make sure that I say, no peanuts in here. This is a no peanut classroom if I am aware of that. I usually ask them, just make sure it's no peanuts or anything like that. But what is the harm? I don't want to prevent anyone from not being able to eat when they need to, because I know for me, I probably don't listen to my body when I need to eat. I fell over the other day that my balance was off, that I was like, oh, I don't think I ate all day. I never want to show my students that I don't care about their mental health or their physical health. And eating is one of those things that we need to be absolutely respectful for, that I can eat anytime I want at school. We need to offer the same respect to our clients as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I imagine it's hard, like balancing societal and cultural norms with being trauma informed as well, and like getting everybody on board.
It is. And it's all, I mean, you can also think about it the opposite way, that trauma informed takes into account the cultural, historical, and gender issues. So, how can we make sure that we are aware of the cultural impact here, making sure that we're not creating any issues? So, one cultural component that I can think of regarding food is fasting. So
Mhm.
there's a video that I play in some of my presentations from Mrs. Chang on Instagram and TikTok, and she makes fun of a teacher that doesn't really get Ramadan. And there's a third grade child sleeping in the classroom, and this teacher walks in and says, "Why is she sleeping? Wake her up. We've got testing coming." And the teacher just casually says, "Hey, it's her first time fasting. It's a little bit difficult on her body today, but it's okay. And I'm allowing her to rest for a little bit." And the teacher's like, "Well, no, we can't do that." And it's just saying, we need to really reflect on ourselves and say, how can I help support this child through their first fasting? I'm not supporting them by giving them a protein bar and saying, I don't care about your religion. You're going to do this because we need to learn. We need to say, how can we collaborate with this family, with this child, and support them through this time that it might be a bit difficult? Can we work with the family and say, hey, what should I expect during this time? Is it possible for her to have water? Do you want me to have food on standby? What do I need to know about this holiday? Because we don't want to cause harm like that teacher who is not aware of what Ramadan is, what that holiday means, what the expectations are. We could possibly cause trauma and harm if we are not understanding what that religion or holiday is. So that is something that we always have to take into account, that not just putting this student in the shoes of every other student that they have holidays off for. This student is going to be fasting every day for a long time. So we need to be aware that we are not causing harm in that moment.
Yeah, such a good point. I feel like it also kind of makes me think about like accommodations that have been made to help people but have been implemented like, across the board. It ends up helping the general population
Yes,
as well. I feel like we could do a better as a society and as educators to provide those accommodations that are trauma informed too.
absolutely. I think that, I mean, I 100% agree with you. Accommodations are universal design. We shouldn't just be saying, well, this person has an IEP, so I can give this accommodation to that person. I mean, we absolutely have to follow that. But also, those accommodations could be useful for someone who does not have an IEP or didn't go through the process of it. I think of even myself. I know for me, maybe a flexible work day would be helpful. And that is, you can actually go to jan.org, and that is an adult accommodation website. So you can put in your work setting or your disability or your needs, and it will give you a list of suggestions of, hey, maybe this accommodation might be helpful for you. I also go through that with my high school students, that we look at possible accommodations because it might be something they want to consider in their future workplace. I know there's some of my students, especially with pragmatics, that don't necessarily want to work in a group, or maybe they're not great face to face with someone. I say, hey, maybe in the future you want to consider a virtual job. Maybe that's we have that way more now. For me, I would love a virtual job. That would be the best case scenario, because I don't need that social part. And that actually distracts me a lot more in the workday, to have people walking around asking me questions. And I'm like, nope, I got to finish this. I have stuff to do. I'm laser focused like that. So we absolutely need to be looking at accommodations as not just good for one student, but good for everyone.
Yeah, I think that's probably your next topic, your next presentation topic is like accommodations for SLPs or like as adults and, you know, like advocating for yourself in the workplace too.
Definitely. Definitely. I would love to talk about that.
I love it. So here's your list of references, any that you want to highlight, or everyone will have access to this as well.
The one that I was talking about earlier is the last one, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. For some reason, I always mix up Services Administration. I always forget that. But this is the like guideline paper about guidance for a trauma-informed approach. And I just took this and started evaluating with my workplace and with my practice of what I do as a speech pathologist, and started evaluating what I do in sessions. And it's a constant work in progress for me. I'm never saying, oh, yep, I'm trauma informed and that's it. I'm always thinking of certain sessions. And it doesn't mean that I have a bad day and I'm dysregulated. It's also about the repair, right? Like that's one of the pillars, is trust and transparency, and collaboration. I would also say that if I'm having a bad session and if I snapped at someone, I would be totally fine with the next day saying, hey, I just wanted to apologize that, yesterday I was a little tense, the noises were bothering me, and I was kind of short with you, and I'm sorry about that. It doesn't matter if they're 3 years old or 90 years old, they're going to appreciate that a lot. So it's really important to just keep reflecting on your own practice within specific sessions with specific clients you have, and say, how can I provide more safety and choice and collaboration, mutuality, trust, transparency, all of that, because you are trying to be as trauma informed as possible. So definitely take a look at that last one, because that will help you evaluate your practice.
We didn't really talk about this. I don't know if this is like a topic for another day, but what do you say to an educator, a parent who says like, well, I'm the adult and they're the child and they should like listen to what I have to say. I don't need to apologize to them. I don't need to, they're not my friends. Like I don't need to build
Yeah.
with them. What do you say to those people?
I get that question a lot, actually. And I grew up in a house that was how I was parented, right? That it was, we are not buddies. I'm here to parent. And I take it as how I work with my students, right? I'm still an authoritative figure, but I'm not an authoritarian figure. And that is a difference, that I can still, it's not as much of a power dynamic. It doesn't mean that I'm friends with them. I've actually taken friends out of my vocabulary for working with my clients. I won't tell a child, hi, friends. Like that's become something that, one of my friends who has kids, she said, adults are not friends with children. And I understand that from a safety component, that I go, oh, you know what? I don't want to confuse anyone and say, hey, friends, even though I mean it very casually, that is something intentional, that I don't want to cause possible harm. That they say, well, Miss A calls me friends. I could be friends with adults. It's like, no, you can't. Or that's up to the parents to decide if they can or can't. But that is something that I'm very intentional with my language to make sure that I don't cause harm. And when I hear that, oh, here's this school of thought, I will change it. But what you were talking about, that power dynamic, I can still be authoritative and people listen to me, my clients listen to me, but from a collaborative effort. And that's totally okay. I'm not telling them how to parent at all. But from a therapy perspective, here is how we can all work together to meet the goals. And it doesn't need to be this immense power dynamic with an authoritarian figure.
Absolutely. And I think like what you were describing and being trauma informed, like if you do carry out in that way where you're authoritarian, that client might shut down and it might look like they're being non-compliant, right? Like going back to that. So trying, to be more trauma informed and like building the relationship and fostering that and using those pillars that you described, you might actually get more participation.
Absolutely. You nailed it with that one. That if I am putting someone into dysregulation or survival mode, they're not going to be in learning mode. So I'm not going to be meeting those goals. If my goal is to have them speak, but I just shut them down, and then we say, oh, they were non-compliant today because they didn't answer me. It's like, well, you just yelled at them and now they're scared. So we need to be mindful of maybe some kids need that. I'm not saying like gentle parents, or like, I'm not talking about a parenting perspective for therapy. We want to make sure that we are not causing harm and to keep them regulated, to make sure that they are in that academic and learning brain. And the best way to do that is to make sure that we are regulated so that we can help regulate them as well.
I'm glad we just keep going back to that, like the topic
It
of
is.
conversation, because I
Yeah.
think that, I'm sure everybody has all of these little thoughts in their head, but it keeps going back to like in therapy, this is what's like important. So thank you for
Yeah,
that.
of course.
So where can everybody find and connect with you?
So on Instagram, you can find me at PTSD.SLP. On my email is listed here. It's Rachel at PTSDSLP.com. And my website is www.ptsdslp.com. I have a bunch of podcasts listed there as well as yours. And yeah, you could find me on there. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, message me on Instagram. I'd be happy to answer.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel. This was awesome and, different than what we did before, but super important for this like overall conference. And I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. I'll come back anytime with more different topics.
I love it.